In the near future, aliens known as hosts are controlling Earth from the shadows. They formed an organization called Transitional Authority who keep cities under military occupation. Transportation passes are required to travel, curfews are very strict, and people who misbehave are sent as slaves to a place known as the factory. In Los Angeles, we'll put some cargo in his work van, but his secretive ways show that this isn't a routine delivery. His co-worker Carlos gives him a piece of paper and asks him to hand it to his family. After just a few blocks he encounters a roadblock, but his ID is fine and they let him pass because his cargo supposedly is work-related. Minutes later Will meets with his contact and pays him with the cargo for his help. Will is hidden in a freezer in the back of a truck with another man, and they're covered with an insulating blanket plus a layer of ice. Inside the freezer there's a small screen so they can see what's happening outside. Aboard, Will tells the other guy that he's looking for his son in Santa Monica because they were separated during the invasion. When they make it to the exclusion zone, they change the driver and the truck gets scanned. But thanks to the ice, the guys aren't found. The truck is authorized to cross the gate, but at that moment an explosion happens and the vehicle starts rolling. The freezer opens and the other guy falls, hitting his head and dying in the process. Will crawls out of the truck and sees the entire area destroyed, only for a bunch of soldiers and drones to surround him. Moments later, Will is locked up in prison and not allowed to make a call. Back in town, Will's wife Katie meets with a nurse who makes insulin in secret since supplies are scarce. Katie pays with a bottle of whiskey, which is also rare, and the deal is done. However, when Katie takes a closer look at the bottle she's given, she can tell it's not fake. She tries to take her whiskey back, and when the woman refuses, Katie reveals she has a gun to get her whiskey and leaves. That night, Katie and her son Abraham are worried because Will hasn't come back from work and it's dangerous after curfew hours. Katie's sister Maddie arrives to ask for the insulin for her son because her supply is almost finished, and Katie promises she'll get some soon. Then she asks her to stay with the kids while she goes looking for Will. First she visits Carlos, who confirms Will was at work but doesn't say anything else. When she returns to the streets, Katie sees a drone coming and hides under a military vehicle currently being used to transport a prisoner. The guy sees Katie, but he doesn't snitch on her. The car takes off and the drone follows it, so Katie is safe and returns home. The next day Katie goes to see Eric, who promises to ask around for information. Then she goes to the hospital, which has more patients than usual. She learns about the explosion, which is being blamed on a gas leak. While everyone is busy with so many wounded people, Katie takes the chance to steal some insulin. When she asks a nurse about her husband, his name isn't on the list. Afterward, Katie calls Eric and they speak in code. He confirms the bomb had been a rebel attack, but Will being there had been a coincidence. Eric also tells her that rebels from the other city picked up Will, so he should be fine. In prison, the soldiers come to pick up Will and call him by his real surname, which he changed when he moved to LA. He's taken to proxy Governor Snyder, who wants Will to give him information about Geronimo, the legendary leader of the resistance. After watching the lights the aliens put up in the sky every night, Snyder threatens to kill Will's family if he doesn't cooperate. A few hours later, the soldiers drop Will at his house. The family is happy to see him, but as soon as the couple has a moment in private, Katie scolds him for what he did and freaks out when she hears he's considering helping Snyder. The next morning they find Snyder cooking in their kitchen surrounded by soldiers. He offers them many great things like good food, tutors for the children, and overall protection if they help him. Snyder even implies he may find their lost son, so Will takes the job. Sometime later, a drone follows Carlos around and the soldiers show up to arrest him. His family sees this from inside their RV and hides inside a storage compartment under the bed to save themselves. At the same time, Katie meets with the resistance and tells them that now she has access to enemy intel thanks to her husband's job. Afterwards, she goes to her old bar, which she had to close after the invasion, but now she can reopen it thanks to Snyder's deal. Eric comes to see her and explains they need to know how close the enemy is to finding the bomber. Meanwhile, Will is given a new ID card and meets his new boss Phyllis, who gives him his first case. He must find and arrest Andrew, the guy behind the bomb. He's also introduced to Agent Bo so they can work together on the case. After Will gets a gun, the duo goes to see Andrew's girlfriend, who pretends she doesn't know anything. However, when Will and Bo go to check the back door, they see Andrew trying to escape. Will chases him through the building and they burst into an apartment, taking the chase through a window. They carefully walk on some beams, but Andrew falls and Will jumps after him to finally catch him while a drone watches. Later at the detention center, Will is shocked to see Carlos in a cell. He learns that their other co-worker was killed and Carlos was captured because of the cargo he helped Will steal. Feeling guilty, Will runs to Phyllis and tells her to release Carlos as an informant because he needs contacts on the street. But Phyllis refuses. Then Will goes to check on Carlos' family and even looks inside the hidden compartment, but they aren't there. At the same time, Carlos' family shows up at Katie's home asking for help. Katie goes to ask Eric for support, but he refuses, saying that the resistance doesn't have the resources to help people. When Will arrives home and finds Carlos' family, he and Katie immediately take them to get new IDs. On the way, they're stopped by a security patrol who apologize and let them carry on as soon as they see Will's government card. They make it to an illegal workshop, and while they wait for the IDs, Katie asks Will about his day and learns that Andrew was arrested. Once the IDs are ready, Carlos' family is taken downstairs to hide with other refugees. Moments later, Katie meets with Rebel Quail and tells him what she knows about Andrew. Quail explains that Andrew could lead the soldiers to the resistance, so she needs to keep an eye on any intel coming from Will to help them. Be ready to hide. In the evening, Will returns to the detention center only to discover Carlos and all the other prisoners were sent to the factory. He goes to complain to Phyllis, who reminds him cooperating with the aliens is actually what has given them decent lives, and that's why she does this job. Humans don't have the technology to fight back, so resistance is foolish. She agrees to give Will at least 2 minutes with Carlos. So Will runs to tell him that his family is safe, however Carlos still hates him for joining the enemy. When Will goes home, Katie comforts him. The moment is interrupted by a call from Bo, who informs him they've found more bombing suspects. Katie overhears this, so after Will leaves, she calls Eric to warn him. Minutes later, Will and Bo arrive at the address Andrew gave them. They go inside and find all the bombers dead of a shot in the head. There's also the word Geronimo painted on the wall. Will now thinks his office has a mole. At the factory, Carlos and the other prisoners are told to strip, then put through an ultraviolet and chemical shower. Afterward, they're dressed with surgical gowns and masks, before they're taken to a mysterious room. The next day, Geronimo pretends to be a homeless man wandering around to enter an abandoned building, where he sets up a small radio transmitter. Then he begins broadcasting, sharing all the atrocities the government has done and telling people to fight back. One of his many listeners is Abraham, who records all his messages on tapes. The soldiers are tracking the broadcast, but by the time they arrive at the building, Geronimo is already gone. In the meantime, Katie meets with the rebels for a mission. They give her a gun and everyone hides their faces. Minutes later, 2 soldiers accidentally hit a man on the road with their truck. But when they come out, they discover it's a doll. The rebels jump out to ambush them, and Eric takes a soldier's radio to call for help. He also shoots in the air for extra realism. Katie is timing everything with watches since they want to know how long it takes for backup to arrive. At that moment, some soldiers jump out from the back of the truck and attack the rebels. A gunfight ensues and Katie hides while all the soldiers get killed. The rebels win the fight, but Justin receives a shot to the chest in the process. Katie tries to help Justin, however Eric pushes her and shoots Justin out of mercy. As random locals start stealing the food from the truck, the rebels run to hide before the drones arrive. They shoot the robbers down while Katie stops the watch. When Katie arrives home, the kid's tutor Lindsay notices she's quite shaken and disheveled. Katie runs to the bathroom to wash the blood off and Will comes to check on her, so she inspires him to get dirty to distract him. Later at the scene of the ambush, Will and Bo are investigating. Will takes a look at Justin's body and can tell he was executed, concluding he must have been a rebel. He informs Phyllis of this and she agrees to track down the body's identity. Moments later, Justin's family is arrested and the soldiers search their house. Agent Jennifer finds a coded message among Justin's things while Will complains about the parents' arrest, but she ignores his concerns. All this is seen by Eric, who immediately goes to tell Quail about it. When Will goes home, he tells Kate about today's arrest, which gets her upset again. Later, Katie meets with Eric, and after she calls him out for shooting Justin, he asks her to find out what the soldiers got from Justin's house. At school, Abraham gives him a copy of the tape to his teacher, Mr. Carson. In return, Carson tells Abraham about his telescope and how something very large in Earth's orbit blocked out the pole star last night. Afterward, Abraham's girlfriend Pia takes him to an abandoned building. Pia has the keys because of her father's job and takes Abraham down a tunnel where they find her cousin, who slipped from the ladder and got hurt. Then Pia reveals that the ladder ends on the other side of the wall that surrounds the city. Apparently, there are no people there now, so she and Pedro have been sneaking out for months to find food. Abraham helps Pia get the cousin out of the tunnel and reach home safely. After getting some leads on Justin from the government's powerful database, Will and Bo go to the community center and discover that the rebels use it for shooting drills. At that moment, someone fires at them from the shadows, so Will shoots back before going after the stranger. However, the man manages to escape. Then Will and Bo find all the hidden weapons in the building and confiscate them. That night, Eric visits Katie and tells him about the guns they lost. He explains Quail wants to kill Will, so in order to save him, Katie must get intel more important than the damage her husband has been causing. When Katie finally reopens her bar, Snyder shows up to remind everyone that he's allowing this to happen. Will and Bo discuss the case over a drink, and their chat is overheard by Katie. When Eric arrives, Katie tells him about Phyllis and the database in exchange for protection for Will. The next day at school, the soldiers burst into a class to arrest a teacher for teaching Bradbury. When a student tries to defend her, the kid is knocked down. The teacher's face is smashed on a table before she's taken away. All this is recorded by the soldiers' potty cams. When they return to headquarters, it's revealed that one of the soldiers is Eric undercover. At the office, Phyllis shows Will an organization chart of all the rebel intel they have so far, which puts Geronimo in the center. She explains most of the people in the Transitional Authority believe that there's a single controlling figure, but she disagrees. She also thinks the rebels can't harm the aliens. She only wants to stop them because they harm peace, and if the aliens ever find out about them, their punishment won't be pretty. At home, Katie sends the kids to the park with Lindsay. Afterward, she sees someone run in her garden and hears a window getting broken. She isn't surprised by this and grabs a fire extinguisher before going to another room, where she puts the flames out in seconds and calls emergencies. By the time Will arrives, soldiers are searching his house, and Jennifer finds an Indian head penny representing Geronimo, which had been inside the bomb. When Will gets home, a doctor is looking after Katie and soldiers are searching the house. Then Katie is taken to the office for some questions, and Phyllis tells her that her organization has talked to the neighbors, who are now in charge of protecting Will's family. If anything happens to them, the whole neighborhood will be held responsible. Phyllis asks Katie for details of what happened and finds many inconsistencies in her story. Afterward, Phyllis tells Will they found Abraham's tapes. She promises she'll destroy them, but she wants Will to discuss matters with his son. Will rushes home and asks Abraham for an explanation. The kid swears he wasn't involved in any rebel activity and he only knew when to tape the broadcasts because on the Geronimo posters there's a code with the date and time of the next message. In the evening, Katie goes to see Quayle and identifies Phyllis after he also promises her husband won't be harmed. Sometime later, Geronimo starts a new broadcast, and thanks to Abraham's trick, Will's team manages to track him down pretty quickly. He's immediately arrested and taken to the detention center, where Will hits him for what the rebels did to his house. After dropping Geronimo off with some doctors, Will goes to see Snyder and Phyllis to tell them he doesn't think this guy is the real leader. Meanwhile, Maddie starts working as an assistant for Charlotte, a rich woman who lives in the Greer zone. One afternoon, she hears that Charlotte doesn't have enough art pieces for a delivery, so she tells her about the gallery she used to work at before the invasion. Charlotte sends her return with more art when she wants to know more. Maddie agrees to tell her about all the art places she knows in exchange for a guaranteed insulin supply for her son, which Charlotte agrees to. After Charlotte leaves the room, her husband Nolan arrives and flirts with Maddie. Later, Jennifer, Bo, Will, and the soldiers search a deserted area because Geronimo told them that this is where he got the scripts to broadcast. Bo finds a tunnel hidden behind some plants, and Will realizes it goes to the green zone. That night, Phyllis shows up at the bar and reveals she knows Katie works for the rebels, showing her pictures as proof. Phyllis then announces that Katie works for her now. Moments later, Phyllis arrives at her house and checks on her husband, who had a stroke some time ago and now is a bedridden vegetable. When she goes into another room, she finds Eric, who immediately shoots both Phyllis and her husband. In the middle of the night, new posters are left in the tunnel. A group of teenagers find them and start putting them up around town. The soldiers try to catch them, but the teens are faster and get to escape. In the green zone, the soldiers do manage to catch the guy doing the delivery at the tunnel. In the morning, Bo comes to tell Will about Phyllis's death, which is overheard by Katie. The duo rushes to Phyllis's home to investigate, and Jennifer shows them the Geronimo graffiti on the wall. Snyder also arrives and gets very scared, so he tells his agents to find Geronimo faster. Then Will goes to the office and pressures the captured teenager until he reveals who gave him the posters. Soon Will, Bo, and a group of soldiers are bursting into the boys' home. They find a hidden passage behind a painting and a room filled with printed equipment. There's a man and a woman, and both of them swear they're Geronimo. Meanwhile, Pia takes Abraham beyond the wall. The old city is badly damaged from the invasion, and there are no people left. They find a warehouse, fool off supplies, and steal a bunch of stuff while sharing some kisses. Afterward, Abraham brings some rare markers for his sister and promises Carson that he'll find him the parts he needs to make a more powerful telescope. Later, Snyder announces to the general public that Geronimo has been captured. However, when he goes to the detention center for the interrogation, it's quite clear that there isn't a real Geronimo. There was never an amazing man who started the rebellion. It's just these two people who sent out posters and radio broadcasts to inspire the locals. In private, Will accuses Jennifer of being the mole. So an angry Jennifer retaliates by sharing Phyllis's suspicions about Katie. When Will gets home, she asks Lindsay for details about the day of the bombing. Then he visits Katie at the bar and asks her about her private talk with Phyllis. So Katie lies about what happened. That night, Will searches the bar but doesn't find any evidence besides a book. Since Snyder promised the public a show, he makes a deal with the first Geronimo they caught, whose actual name is Luis. If he confesses he's Geronimo during the trial, Luis will only pretend to execute him and move him to another location. A desperate Luis agrees. For the next few days, Luis' trial is televised and he's given a death sentence. Snyder acts as the judge and goes back on his deal, making the soldiers hang Luis for real in front of everyone. After the event is over, Snyder leaves with Will in his car while a convoy of soldiers that includes Eric protects them. One of the streets is blocked by a rebel disguised as a worker, so the cars have to take a different route. Suddenly, Eric shoots the window to make the car stop and causes Snyder's vehicle to crash against it. As Snyder's driver passes out, Eric starts killing the soldiers in his car while Katie keeps an eye on the time nearby. Another car arrives full of soldiers, but it's actually the rebels in disguise. They shoot black paint at Snyder's car to cover the windows before tearing off a passenger door. Will and the bodyguard immediately open fire, killing a few rebels. Then Will jumps into the driver's seat and Eric can't shoot him because he promised Katie, which allows Will to drive away after the bodyguard gets shot too. Katie announces the time is almost over, so the rebels have no choice but to leave. Afterward, Katie goes to her bar and hides all her rebel things in a vent. At that moment, Will arrives with Snyder to hide there until help comes. Unfortunately, the land phone isn't working, so Will leaves to find a payphone. Then Katie hides in another room and uses her secret radio to tell Eric that Snyder is with her. Soon Will comes back and announces help will be there in 20 minutes. Katie takes him to the bathroom to take care of his wound, and she tries to convince him to hand Snyder over to the rebels, but he refuses. When the couple comes out, Snyder tells them that he's confirmed their missing son Charlie is alive and he's working to bring him here. It's complicated because he's in another colony and there isn't much communication between colonies, not to mention the deserted land between them is dangerous. At that moment, Eric knocks on the door while still dressed as a soldier. Since Snyder doesn't trust his guards anymore, he and Will hide. Katie pretends she doesn't recognize Eric and lets him in as a concerned citizen. He searches every room including the bathroom where Snyder is hiding but doesn't check the stall. Then he goes down into the cellar with Katie so they can talk in private. Eric asks Katie to get Snyder through the back door so they can finish this, then he leaves. Afterward, Will notices that Snyder left his jacket in the main room and thinks the soldiers saw it, so they must prepare for the worst. They barricade every door before Snyder reminds them to cooperate if they don't want him to ruin their lives again. Katie gets furious and tries to push him out of the bar where a bunch of rebels dressed as soldiers are waiting. However, Will stops her and saves Snyder. When Quayle hears about the situation from Eric, he tells him not to protect Will anymore. Snyder tells Will he doesn't understand how they got rebels in the force because everyone was screened according to an algorithm. It turns out the database they used was brought by the aliens who had already researched Earth before coming here. Suddenly, Will hears people on the roof, so he makes Katie and Snyder hide. The front door is broken down and a gas grenade is thrown inside the bar, so Will opens fire to kill the fake soldiers as they try to get in. A man manages to get close enough, but before he can shoot Will, Katie comes out and shoots the soldier first. Then Eric comes in and threatens the couple until they back off. Will tells him Snyder is in the office, but when they check there, the back door is open and Eric runs out to go after Snyder. At that moment, some soldiers arrive led by Lagarza, a man that Snyder trusts. Katie tells them Snyder ran away, but Will reveals he actually hid him in the cupboard and lied to Eric. Now Snyder gets to leave safely. That night at home, Will tells Katie the truth behind Geronimo. Sometime later in the Green Zone, it's shown that some people have joined a new religion that worships the aliens. Nolan and Lindsay are part of this group. After the service is over, Nolan goes home and gets dirty with Maddie while Charlotte watches. In the afternoon, Nolan flirts with Maddie in front of the maid and tries to convince her to get dirty, but Maddie reminds her that Charlotte gave them one rule: they can only do it if she's there to watch. Meanwhile, Lindsay tells Katie's daughter Gracie about the new religion, saying that the greatest day ever is coming. She shows her the religious book and asks her to keep the secret. At the same time, Katie arrives at the bar and discovers the soldiers searching the place. At the office, Will asks Snyder to give Jennifer access to the database, and soon they have Eric's registered address. The database has tons of data on him, and it'll take a while to read. When a team of soldiers arrives at Eric's address, the house explodes and kills 4 men. Afterward, Will and Bo interview soldiers that worked with Eric while he was undercover. The only useful information is Eric's tattoo that marks him as a Marine. Since Jennifer hasn't found anything useful on Eric's profile, Will guesses he used a fake name to join the troops. So he makes her search for someone with his face and a military career instead. Jennifer tries that and discovers Eric has dozens of identities in the system. In the meantime, Eric pretends to be a trash collector to surprise 2 soldiers. He kills them quickly and hides them in the trash before opening their truck, where he finds tons of bagged bodies. Eric steals a body that looks like him. Then he and Quayle put it inside a van and light it on fire to make it look like Eric is dead. Quayle also announces it's time to kill Katie because he's concluded she's a double agent. When the soldiers find the van, Bo believes the body is Eric, but Will is skeptical. Katie finds a hidden message at the usual spot and decodes it using her book. She follows the instructions and meets with Eric, who questions her loyalty. In return, Katie questions Quayle's orders and tells Eric the truth about Geronimo, which means Quayle has been lying to them about receiving orders from a mighty leader. After a short argument, Katie walks away and Eric doesn't dare to kill her. The next day, Will updates Snyder on the case and he's rewarded with an envelope. He doesn't open it until he gets home. Together with Katie, they look at the contents of the envelope and find a recent picture of their missing son Charlie. In the Green Zone, Maddie isn't allowed to touch the art and Charlotte threatens to stop giving her insulin. It turns out the maid told Charlotte that she broke the rule. Maddie immediately goes to Nolan to complain about these rich people games, so Nolan admits he's tired of Charlotte and wants a new partner. He encourages Maddie to report Charlotte's illegal art business. Later, Maddie gives Charlotte the contact of an important art dealer, but it's clear she's hiding something at the office. Bo finds something among the fingerprints and Will rushes home to tell Katie that Eric went to the bar before. He also shows her pictures of all the people Eric killed, so Katie finally gives in and pretends Eric was a regular client, saying he mentioned living at his mother's house in Hancock Park. With this information, Jennifer manages to find Eric's real profile and his address. At the bar, Katie is visited by Rebel Rachel, who convinces her that Eric trusts her and is doing his best to protect humanity. Feeling guilty, Katie calls Eric and warns him that the soldiers are coming, so he manages to escape right before they arrive. While they search the house, Will sees Quayle in the garden next door but assumes he's just a neighbor. Among Eric's things, Will is shocked to find the same book Katie has. At the factory, Carlos and the other slaves continue to work with strange machines without talking. After the shift change, Carlos' group is given a meal. Suddenly a worker starts coughing blood, so the guards drag him away into the elevator. When Carlos goes to bed, he looks out the window and watches the Earth, confirming the factory is on the moon. On Earth, Abraham and Carson use the new telescope they built to look at the moon and see a structure there, but it's too blurry. The next morning, Will can't stop staring at Katie since he suspects her now. He also shows Abraham and Gracie the picture of Charlie, saying there shouldn't be any secrets in their house. Afterward, Katie meets with Rachel and confesses she wants to quit the resistance. So Rachel promises to talk to Quayle. At the office, Will gets a call from Quayle, who tells him that Katie is the mole and asks him to meet him in the bus. During the trip, Quayle offers a deal. He can give the government all the names of the rebels except Katie's in exchange for being able to leave LA with supplies. If Will says no, Katie's name will be the first one to leak. Quayle gives Will his number before getting off the bus. At the same time, Eric meets with a man from another town, who shares a plan to kill a minister who will be visiting LA soon. Eric then meets with Quayle to pass on this information. Later, Will tell Snyder about Quayle's deal without mentioning. Snyder is desperate for good news because the incoming minister will do an inspection, so he tells Will to arrange a meeting. In the evening, Will tells Katie that the leader of the resistance asked for a deal, which makes her nervous. She leaves a warning message for Eric on the phone. Moments later, Eric meets with Quayle and demands an explanation. Quayle denies being a traitor and says that the plan Eric gave him earlier looks solid. The next day, Will and Snyder meet with Quayle and they seal the deal. Moments later, the rebels show up at the market for a meeting with Quayle. However, Katie is hiding in a building and sees the soldiers hiding on the roofs, so she immediately warns Eric through a hidden mic. Then she throws some firecrackers in the middle of the market, causing everyone to panic and run away. Eric gets to escape and Quayle is rescued by the soldiers while Lagarza opens fire, killing a few people including Rachel. At the office, Jennifer finds Quayle in the system and discovers he used to be CIA. Snyder cancels the deal and wants him to be interrogated. Will announces he'll pick Quayle up, but when he arrives at the same house, Quayle starts taunting him by talking about Katie. Will immediately shoots him and the two guards, then Bo agrees to help him plan a cover story. Afterward, they tell Snyder that Quayle was already dead when they got there. Downtown, Katie and other civilians are horrified to see a bunch of bodies hung under a bridge. It's Rachel and her two sons with signs that say terrorist. Eric reminds Katie this is why they fight. That night, Will tells Katie that she doesn't have to worry about the leader, as an indirect way to say he knows she's a rebel and that Quayle is dead. A few nights later, citizens are launching paper hot air balloons with pictures of the people they lost during the invasion. Soon the soldiers arrive to remind them of the curfew and push a man to make him go home. Suddenly someone fires from the shadows and a soldier falls dead, so the rest of the team gets violent as they fight the civilians to send them home. In the chaos, a kid cries as his father gets arrested. The next morning, Will and Bo find multiple dead soldiers all over town. The duo goes to see Snyder and tells him they have information that operations are being directed from the other side of the wall. Snyder is skeptical but agrees to let them go as long as they take Lagarza with them. Meanwhile, Eric introduces Katie to his informants and they discuss a plan for the ministry's visit. When Katie asks how they get all this intel, they show her a little drone shaped like an insect. That night, Eric teaches Katie how to be a better shooter. Soon Will, Bo, and the soldiers are allowed to cross the barrier and reach the destroyed town outside the wall. They search an old building and on the top floor, Will plants a map before he and Bo start shooting at random objects. Will calls Lagarza pretending they're in trouble and need backup. Will runs outside and comes back in when Lagarza arrives, pretending he tried to chase the shooters and lost them. Lagarza finds the map and takes it to Snyder, who informs them that other soldiers found a tunnel under the wall and it'll be sealed. Since Will is secretly planning to use that tunnel to escape, he convinces Snyder they should set a trap instead. The next day, Snyder shows up with his soldiers at Nolan's house and arrests Charlotte for her illegal art deals. Charlotte tries to blame Maddie, but she says she's just an assistant. Snyder agrees not to get Nolan involved and puts all the blame on Charlotte, so later Nolan thanks him by bringing him the secret proposal to replace him that is going around the green zone. That night, Katie is chatting with Gracie and is weirded out by the ominous things she says, so she finally checks the book her daughter is reading and discovers the weird religion. When Will comes home, Katie shows him the book, but Will isn't bothered because he has a plan to help the whole family escape the colony. Katie freaks out and they start fighting as they both accuse each other of lying. In the end, Katie announces she wants to keep on fighting and refuses to leave with him. Afterward, Will meets with Bo and tells him to escape without him. Meanwhile, Eric and Katie arrive at the subway station and start killing every guard they see. Since this place is empty at this hour, they're done in just a few minutes, although they notice some guards are wearing different uniforms. Then the duo opens a hole in the wall to let the other rebels in and they install a bomb on the tracks. When the VIP train arrives, it hits the explosive and instantly blows up. The team then searches the train, and among the dead guards, they find a strange robotic suit with an alien inside. The next morning, Will, Jennifer, and all the soldiers are told that the rebels kidnapped an alien. They need to find him fast because the last time this happened in Dallas, the aliens destroyed the city as punishment. Meanwhile, the rebels are escaping on a modified car that runs on the train tracks while discussing what to do. With the alien, they check the body and find a tracker, so they wrap it in foil to block its signal before carrying it to headquarters. When Will gets home, he tells Maddie that things will be dangerous in town for a while and asks her to take the kids away. So Maddie offers to take them to the green zone. He also asks Abraham if he knows where Katie is. So Abraham shares the emergency number his mother gave him in secret. Will calls the number, but nobody picks up. While the rebels are trying to make their way to their headquarters, an alarm begins ringing through the whole town. Usually this means curfew, but Eric realizes they're putting the city on lockdown. Soon a furious crowd gathers outside the green zone, asking to be let in. When a man tries to cross the gate without authorization, a guard beats him up. While Maddie presents her ID to the receptionist, Abraham sneaks away. Maddie is allowed to enter the green zone with her son, Gracie, and the family dog. Nolan receives them with open arms in his home but reminds Maddie she'll have to choose a side soon. Meanwhile, Abraham goes back to town and picks up Carson, telling him that all this chaos is the perfect moment to sneak out through the tunnel to find one of the old observatories in the old city. At the subway station, Jennifer and Will check the security footage, finding Eric and Katie on camera. Jennifer doesn't seem to recognize Katie, so Will keeps his mouth shut. On the streets, one of the rebels pretends to need help and two soldiers stop to arrest her. Eric immediately shoots them down and the group steals their van. As they cross the town, they notice more drone activity than usual and are shocked to see them blow up a building. Soon there are buildings exploding all over town, which is the way the aliens have to slowly punish them. The rebels manage to make it to their headquarters and Katie points out people are dying because of their kidnapping, but the others want to get some intel from the strange suit before thinking about other options. At that moment the phone rings and Katie picks it up thinking it's Abraham, but it's actually Will. To avoid getting the rebels angry, Katie pretends she's talking to her son and hangs up after hearing her kids are safe in the green zone. Then the group begins working on cutting the alien's suit open, but none of their tools are strong enough to even make a scratch. Will asks Jennifer to track the number, but the computer says it's registered at the prison's address. Then Will gives Jennifer Katie's book. Since they have a message from Rachel's body, Jennifer starts working on decoding it and the result mentions a special opportunity. They check the footage of the market and notice Eric's informant acting weird, so they search for him in the database to get his address. Will asks Jennifer to give him 20 minutes to rescue Katie, then she can send the soldiers back to the rebels. They use the alien's own fingers to activate the suit's computer, so now they can remove it from the glove. At that moment, Will arrives and tells them the soldiers are coming, so Katie tells the rebels to leave. They still want a few minutes to finish getting some intel, and Katie snaps, removing the signal blockers from the lab. This activates the suit's tracker and the location will reach the drones soon. Now the rebels have no choice but to escape with the glove computer after they cover the tracker again with foil. The group leaves through a hidden door, but Katie stays one last moment with Will. They can hear the drones coming, so Katie leaves and lets Will pretend he found the alien body. Minutes later, the soldiers retrieve everything and Snyder rewards Will with a pass to get to Santa Monica to find his son. In the green zone, Maddie is shocked to discover Nolan has hired Lindsay. Meanwhile, Abraham and Carson try to cross the tunnel only to be ambushed by soldiers. At the office, Snyder is fired from his position. At the wall, Will crosses the gate with his new ID without issues. Katie goes to her empty house, unaware that now there's a hidden camera.